impulse equals force times time. Here's my favorite demonstration of impulse. I have 2 eggs, same mass. I'm going to try to throw each egg with the same velocity. That means they have the same momentum. If the impulses were equal, why do we have such dramatically different results? The wall applies a big stopping force over a short time. The sheet applies a smaller stopping force over a longer time period. My students say the sheet has more give to it. Both stop the egg, both decelerate the egg's momentum to 0, but it takes a smaller force to reduce the egg's momentum over a longer time. In fact, so much smaller that it doesn't even crack the egg shell. Now let's relate this to automobiles. Both of these cars have the same mass, and both are traveling at the same speed, 30 miles per hour. Like the eggs, they have equal momenta. As a result, it will take equal impulses to reduce their momenta to 0. One car will stop by panic braking, and the other by normal braking. If the impulses must be equal to decelerate each car's momentum to 0, the driver that stops in less time or distance must experience a larger force and the higher deceleration. And let's also assume the car's front end crushes 1 foot with uniform deceleration of the passenger compartment throughout the crash. In this crash, the driver would experience 30 Gs. However, if the vehicle's front end was less stiff, so it crushed 2 feet instead of 1, the deceleration would be cut in half to 15 Gs. This is because the crush distance, or the time the force is acting on the driver, is doubled. Extending the time of impact is the basis for many of the ideas about keeping people safe in crashes. It's the reason for airbags and crumple zones in the vehicles you drive. It's the reason for crash cushions and breakaway utility poles on our highway.
We use the stripped-down body to illustrate the concepts of good and poor structural designs for modern crashworthiness.
Brian, why is it important for the vehicle structure to perform well in a crash?
Well, this is what's left of the body and structure of a car that was in a crash, and we use this to illustrate the point. Basically, we want the occupant compartment or the safety cage to remain intact. We don't want any damage or intrusion into this part of the vehicle during the crash.
Okay.
We want all of the damage of the crash confined to the front end.
So even though all this metal looks the same, it's actually different. The green metal is intended to crumple, to give in the collision.
If we can crumple the front end of the car without allowing any damage to the occupant compartment, then the people inside can be protected against serious injury. Basically, we want the front end to be buckling during the crash so that the occupant compartment is slowed down at a gentler rate.
Right. Kind of like jumping off of a step and keeping your knees straight and landing on the floor versus bending your knees when you land.
Exactly the same concept. So this is a vehicle that did well because there's very little intrusion anywhere in the occupant compartment. These elements here, even though they're strong enough to hold an engine and suspension, actually buckled and crushed just like they're designed to do. So the damage is confined to the front end. We look at a vehicle like this, and this is an example of a very poor safety cage. This vehicle was in a 40-mile-an-hour crash, and as you can see that the occupant compartment has collapsed, it's been driven backwards. As a result, the driver's space has been greatly reduced, so someone sitting in this vehicle is obviously at a high risk of injury. So this is an example of poor crashworthiness. But this vehicle was in the same crash, 40-mile-an-hour, offset crash, and you can see that now the safety cage has remained intact. There's very little intrusion anywhere. The damage is confined to the crumple zone of the vehicle. This is the way it should be. A person in a crash like this, wearing their seat belt and protected by the airbag, can walk away from the crash with no injury.
Right. If I stand over here and I just look towards the rear of the car and I ignore the airbag, this doesn't even look like it's been in a crash.
That's right. This is good performance, good crashworthiness.
In our shipping box analogy, this is an example of a strong box.
That's right. The people in this box will be protected.